Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. On December 4th, UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson left his hotel for a short walk to the New York Hilton Midtown. Later that day, he was going to be addressing the annual investors meeting. But before he got there, as he walked by, a shooter emerged from between two cars, took aim, and shot Thompson from behind. Thompson was killed. The shooter fled down an alley and then up 6th Avenue toward Central Park. The manhunt after that was intense, but the shooter was at large for 5 days. On December 9th, this past Monday, Altoona, Pennsylvania police announced they had arrested 26-year-old Luigi Mangione and said that they believed he is the killer of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. He is now facing charges in both Pennsylvania and New York. Tonight, what we're going to do is unpack those charges. What exactly is he charged with? And he's charged in 2 different states, both in Pennsylvania and in New York, with different offenses. So we're going to talk about what those are so you'll understand what's happening in this case. We're going to start with how the arrest went down, just a couple of clips from the news conference about that. Then we're going to talk about the charges in Pennsylvania, then the charges in New York, and then finally we're going to talk a little bit about how he is pleading. What is he saying about whether or not he's guilty? So be sure to follow me over on X. I'm Lawyer Lee W over on X. And yesterday, a post I did on this case has gotten 26 million views. So be sure to follow me over there. I am posting regularly on this case and other cases that we're covering here. So special shout out to the first 5 in tonight's chat: L. Jane, Loretta Powell, CT Annie, Michael Lalonde, and Linda Smith. Welcome. Special welcome to all of you, but especially to those first 5. This is Mods Week on the channel, which means that all super chats go to the mods. So I am so grateful to already see a bunch of people giving super chats, and I am very appreciative of that. Thank you, and thanks to our fabulous mods, as Nina Robinson says. First of all, Michael, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Red Sky, I appreciate that super sticker as well. Nina, thank you. And I totally agree. Thanks to our fabulous mods. I'm very grateful to them. And then Sarah Boone, Nina is telling me, sent the unedited statement to Judge Kranick. Well, that sounds fun. I definitely would like to see that. That was one wild sentencing hearing that we covered. And we'll stop here with Susie Q. Thanks to the best mods out there. And I totally agree with that. Thank you to Marlon and mamapinks and to denisepelton. And let's dive into what's happening with the Luigi Mangione case. Now, let's start with the Altoona press conference. Now, I got corrected. Some of y'all wrote me, I'm used to saying Allatoona because there's a lake not far from here that is called Allatoona, but it's not. It's Altoona, Pennsylvania, as y'all told me. So that's where a press conference occurred, and they talked about how the arrest of Luigi Mangione happened. Here it is.
It was a peaceful arrest, first and foremost. The officer quickly recognized the male as the suspect from the shooting. And within several seconds of the first contact, he had asked the suspect if he had been in New York City recently. And that really invoked a physical reaction from the suspect. He became visibly nervous, kind of shaking at that question. And he didn't really answer it directly. So that statement alone really said a lot. And the suspect didn't have to say a lot after that question to show that, he was very nervous at that point.
And as soon as he...
Let me stop right there. The next is the officer who actually made the arrest of Luigi Mangione. It was at a McDonald's. This is Officer Fry. And does anyone else catch the irony that Officer Fry made the arrest at the McDonald's?
He was wearing a blue medical mask. As soon as we pulled that down, or we asked him to pull it down, me and my partner and I recognized him immediately, just from what we saw in the media with photos, videos. We just didn't even think twice about it. We knew that was our guy, but he was very He was very cooperative with us, didn't really give us too many issues. Once we found out his identity, we took it from there.
The suspect.
Peaceful
Okay,
arrest, first and foremost.
Wait, let's stop right there. And I'm going to go ahead and cue it up for the next thing that we're going to do, which will be right about right there. I'll just go ahead and pull it out for now. We won't have much redundant, I don't think. So at that point, there were no Pennsylvania charges or even Pennsylvania interest in Luigi Mangione, except for what he had done in New York. So at that stage, they were just looking for the person because the APB had been put out by New York that they wanted this person. But in the course of this interaction with Luigi Mangione in Pennsylvania, several charges ultimately were filed against him in Pennsylvania. That's the first thing that we're going to talk about. And so let's take a look at the document that got filed in Pennsylvania. And this is the police criminal complaint, as you can see, and I've got it marked out with some special things that I want to talk about as we go through. This is a document that would be filed initially to get charges started. As you can see, it's the complaint, the start. It's the first thing that gets said about what the problems are. And it's going to list the various things that Pennsylvania is charging Luigi Mangione with. And you can see it's sworn by a police officer, and then it comes down here with the police criminal complaint. And I'm going to go over each of the counts against him. The first is forgery. And it's convenient. They defined right here in the statute. There are a couple of places where I've pulled out the statute because I had something extra to say, but for the most part, they make it pretty easy. So the offense is defined as a person is guilty of forgery if, with intent to defraud or injure anyone, or with knowledge that he is facilitating a fraud or injury to be perpetrated by anyone, the actor utters any writing which he knows to be forged in a manner specified in paragraphs 1 or 2 of this subsection. Now that sounds crazy complicated, right? So first of all, the word utter is just a fancy legal term there referring to using or making a forged or counterfeit document. So all it's saying is a person is guilty of forgery if he forges a writing. That's basically what it says, with a lot more words in there. Let's go ahead and head down here. And I do want you to notice it's a second-degree felony. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But I want to go ahead and read the synopsis of what happened, because I think that'll be easier to bring us back into then each count. To wit, meaning start. It's this fancy legal language that lawyers put in that is not even really necessary. You could just leave that out and just start with, in fact, you could lead out on the aforementioned date and time. You could just start with on December 9th, 2024 at 09:14 hours, affiant, I don't know what PTLM stands for. I'm not sure about that, but that's the same officer we just heard about. Fry and co-affiant, also PTLM, Detweiler with the Altoona Police Department were dispatched to 407 East Plank Road, Altoona, for a suspicious male who resembled the male from a recent shooting in New York from December 4th. Now, we know from what happened and what we learned later that this was a McDonald's address, and we learned that initially, and it's a little unclear exactly how it all came to be, but we know that an employee called 911, an employee of the McDonald's. She herself was suspicious, but it seems that it was a customer who became suspicious and asked her to call 911 to report that it appeared that maybe the suspect was there in the McDonald's. Officers were advised in the dispatch notes that the male was wearing a medical mask and a beanie. Upon arrival, officers were able to locate the male, matching the aforementioned description, sitting in the rear of the building at a table. He was wearing a blue medical mask and was looking at a silver laptop computer that was placed on the table. The male also had a backpack on the floor near the table he was sitting at. Co-affiant made contact with the male and informed that the officers were called to the McDonald's for a suspicious male matching his description. Co-affiant asked the male to pull down his medical mask so he could see his face. The male complied and pulled down his mask. Affiant and co-affiant immediately recognized him as the suspect from New York City incident after seeing photos released of him from media sources. And the photo that they are referring to, I'm sure, is the one time in a 10-day stretch while he was in New York, and throughout which he apparently wore this mask, but he pulled it down to speak to a Starbucks employee. And according to what we've been told by law enforcement, they were flirting with each other. She asked him to pull the mask down, and he did. And there was a video camera right there, and they were able to capture a still shot showing the face of the person they were looking for. Co-affiant asked the male for identification and provided officers a New Jersey driver's license bearing the name Mark Rosario and a date of birth, which I redacted. Affiant took the license and ran the information. Although, may I say, it's a fake license, right? So I don't know if I really needed to redact the date of birth, but just out of habit, I did. Affiant took the license and ran the information through the dispatch center. Co-affiant asked the male if he had been to New York recently, and the male became quiet and started to shake. Additional units from the Altoona Police Department arrived on scene to assist affiant and co-affiant in identifying the male. At this time, dispatch was unable to find any information on NCIC with the information provided by officers. So what they're doing and what they're talking about there is they are going and looking for any other criminal charges against the person they've now found. And they're trying to see, is there some kind of charge against this person? They're looking in databases to see whether they can find that. Lieutenant Hanley arrived on scene and also ran the information the male provided to officers, but still found that no record was able to be found. The male was advised that he was under an official police investigation, and if he lied out his identity, he would get arrested. The male then stated that his name was the defendant, Luigi Mangione, with a date of birth of, again, redacted out. So initially, they're looking in the database for the wrong person because that's not the actual ID. He now gives them another name, although there's still not going to be anything in the database for this. The driver's license that the defendant provided to officers was found to be a fake identification card. That's going to play part of what they charge him with. PTLM Fox asked the defendant why he lied out his name, and the defendant replied, "I clearly shouldn't have." Lieutenant Hanley then instructed officers to place the defendant into custody for 4101A3 forgery and 4914A false identification to law enforcement. The defendant was then placed into custody. It says the place, but I think it means then. The defendant was handcuffed and was searched on scene. The defendant was then transported back to Altoona Police Department station, where his property was inventoried pursuant to the Altoona Police Department's policy. During a search of the defendant's backpack, officers located, and this is going to be yet more going toward the charges against him, a black 3D printed pistol and a black silencer. The pistol had a metal slide and a plastic handle with a metal threaded barrel. The pistol had one loaded Glock magazine with 6 9mm full metal jacket rounds. There was also one loose 9mm hollow point round. The silencer was also 3D printed. Now that 3D print is going to play a part in the charges against him, because what that means is it was not purchased through a regular provider of firearms. Instead, this was created by somebody outside the normal realm of how it gets controlled. The defendant is being charged with 4103A3 forgery, 4106A2 firearms not to be carried without a license, 4104A tampering with records or identification, 907A instruments of a crime, and 4914A false identification to law enforcement. The defendant will need to be fingerprinted and photographed. So you've now seen, that's the description of what happened. So taking that, let's head back in here and talk about what the charges are and how they fit with what we just heard. So there's a second-degree felony. I believe that's what the F2 that I highlighted up there means, for forgery. That would be, I feel sure, that would be the driver's license that he gave them that was not correct, that said Mark Rosario. And then he later admitted that's not my real name. The second is it's a second degree felony, but it's also nowhere near even remotely as serious, of course, as murder. And one of the things his lawyer is going to say is that it's really unfair that he's not getting bail because he's not being charged with offenses serious enough to be something you would get denied bail. And that he believes, in other words, that the court is really choosing whether or not to give him bail based on charges from New York, which at that point hadn't even been filed. Okay, next thing he's charged with, 186106, firearms not to be carried without a license. In other words, that he was carrying firearms without a license. Now, this is a third degree felony, except as provided in paragraph 2. Any person who carries a firearm in any vehicle or any person who carries a firearm concealed on or about his person, except in his place of abode or fixed place of business, without a valid and lawfully issued license under this chapter, commits a felony of the third degree. In other words, you need a license. And if you're carrying it around in your vehicle, if you're carrying it around on your person, which he would have to be because he didn't have a vehicle, at least as we understand it, then that means that there's a violation of this. And we'll go ahead and see if... So we'll wait. Let's wait, and I'll get into that. Let me go ahead and finish up this. Okay. So then there is the next count is 184104, tampering with records or identification. A person commits a misdemeanor of the first degree, and this is misdemeanor. We're now out of the realm of felonies. If, knowing that he has no privilege to do so, he falsifies, destroys, removes, or conceals any writing or record or distinguishing mark or brand or other identification with intent to deceive or injure anyone or to conceal any wrongdoing. So I don't really know what he tampered with. I don't know what identification he tampered with. It may refer again to that false ID, and maybe somehow he tampered with an original one or changed his own ID in order to make this fake one look like him. So this may be related to the same issue that we heard about just a minute ago. 18907A, possessing instruments of crime. Criminal instruments. Generally, a person commits a misdemeanor of the first degree if he possesses any instrument of crime with intent to employ it criminally. And in this case, I believe the instrument of crime, as opposed to a firearm, I think they're talking about the silencer. And they're saying it's a misdemeanor to possess a silencer if you intend to employ it criminally. And then finally, false identification to law enforcement authorities. This is a third degree misdemeanor, so really less significant. A person commits an offense if he furnishes law enforcement authorities with false information about his identity after being informed by a law enforcement officer who is in uniform or who has identified himself as a law enforcement officer that the person is the subject of an official investigation of a violation of law. Now, I don't know if they're really going to be able to make that one stick. And the reason I think that is because, and I went ahead and marked it down here, that that he was specifically, I didn't mark it, that he was told, he said, "This is my name, Mark Rosario, here's my ID." He handed it to them. And then they told him, look, they advised him he was under an official police investigation. It's right here. And oops, well, that's crazy looking. Well, just delete that. That looks terrible. Okay, close enough. And if he lied out his identity, he would get arrested. And then he gave them the correct information. So given that the statute actually says that you have to first be informed by a law enforcement officer that the person is the subject of an official investigation of a violation of law, it may be that that one won't stick. It was just a third degree misdemeanor anyway. So none of these are anywhere remotely close, of course, to murder in the second degree. The most significant legally by far is the second degree felony related to forgery of the driver's license. Firearm not carried without a license comes next, also a felony, that one a third degree, and then everything else is simply a misdemeanor. Nonetheless, he was denied bail and not permitted bail, And really the reason, and I think his attorney would definitely argue this, was because of the concerns from New York. At that point in time, those had not actually been filed. Now they have. That's what we're going to be looking at next, is what the charges in New York are. But first, let's go ahead and hear a little bit from, there was a corresponding press conference. You heard a small clip from the one that happened in Altoona, Pennsylvania, as the arrest occurred. Now you're going to hear from the New York Police Department conference that happened in New York, talking about how the evidence that they found in Pennsylvania connected to the New York case that was being pursued related to the murder of Brian Thompson.
Once we found out his identity, we took it from there.
The suspect was in a McDonald's and was recognized by an employee who then called local police. Responding officers questioned the suspect, who was acting suspiciously and was carrying multiple fraudulent IDs as well as a U.S. passport. Upon further investigation, officers recovered a firearm on his person as well as a suppressor, both consistent with the weapon used in the murder. They also recovered clothing, including a mask consistent with those worn by our wanted individual. Also recovered was a fraudulent New Jersey ID, matching the ID our suspect used to check into his New York City hostel before the shooting incident. Additionally, officers recovered a handwritten document that speaks to both his motivation and mindset.
Now, my next video, I'm going to be talking and putting together a list of the evidence that they believe is going to be used to convict Luigi Mangione for the murder of Brian Thompson. So I'm going to be looking at what evidence do they claim to have? What is the evidence? What do we know about it? So I'm going to be putting that video together next. But as you can see, they're talking about all of the things that were found in Pennsylvania that they believe connected, like the ID that was the same as the one used to check into the youth hostel. Then there's this handwritten document. We've not seen it, but it supposedly is some kind of manifesto or statement of his belief. We've been told it certainly shows anti-corporate greed, although frankly, lots and lots of people are anti-corporate greed. So it really needs to go a little further than that. I would really like to know what it says specifically. There was also the firearm and the suppressor or silencer. We saw that it was called two different things in the two press conferences, but so we have seen all of those. So for all of you who wrote last time, oh, it's not a suppressor, it's a silencer, or the other way around, I'm just saying that they said both. All right, so then going back to the Pennsylvania press conference for just a little clip, I want you to hear about where they're going to be looking in terms of what they found in Luigi Mangione's effects.
Certainly, there were a number of items that were found on his person, in his backpack, that have been inventoried, and we've begun to do an analysis of some of those. There were written documents. There are electronic devices that are in the process of being downloaded. Search warrants are obtained.
Understanding that you have said you...
Okay, let's stop before we get, that's his attorney. But before we get to that, and let me go ahead and pull out and talk to you for just a minute. So that is somewhere else they're going to be looking. They're going to be looking not just at the written document they found, but that at electronic devices that they took from Luigi Mangione when he was arrested. We know, we've been told he was on a computer. There may have been a phone. There may have been other devices. They say electronic devices, plural, as if they did find more than one, but we don't know exactly what they found, other than we were told that sitting there in the McDonald's, he was actually on a computer. So we are now going to dive into the charges in New York, because those were filed, frankly, it looks quite like it was quite hastily after the arrest in Pennsylvania. And that was, I think, to make sure that he got held for the more serious charges and also to begin the extradition process. That hasn't happened yet. We'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we dive into the New York charges, let me just say a few additional thanks. LA Mac, thank you for your message to the mods saying you are doing a great job. I completely agree. I appreciate that very much. and Scout November Light. Go Mods. Fully agreed. Fully agreed. Michael, thank you. I love blue. I appreciate that. Diane has been a member for 4 months. That is awesome. Glad to have you for 4 months, Diane. Nana of 7 says, Merry Christmas to all the mods. Fully agree with that as well. Oh, thank you. Loretta Powell is telling me PTLM is patrolman. Thank you. I am terrible with acronyms. Thank you. I greatly appreciate that, Loretta. Thank you very much. All right. So let's dive into New York and what the charges in New York are. I'm going to put that document up on the screen. That's not the document yet. Give me just a minute to get to it. Okay, so this is the felony arrest warrant filed in New York. It's pretty short, it's pretty bare bones, and we can go through it really quickly. As you can see, that's all there is to it. I'm sure something more detailed will get filed at some later point, but I think they wanted to make sure it got filed promptly. So it's not even dated. If you go down to the bottom, you see there's a signature and no date and no time. At least the one that I got that's how it was. So this is filed by a detective, Yusuf Deems, and he says the defendant is charged with, lists 5 things. We're going to go through each of them and talk a little bit about it. They're not as defined in New York as they were in Pennsylvania, but murder in the 2nd degree, criminal possession of a weapon, also in the 2nd degree, criminal possession of a weapon in the 2nd degree, another count, criminal possession of a forged instrument in the 2nd degree, and criminal possession of a weapon in the 3rd degree. And we'll read a little bit about what they say. On or about December 4th, 2024, at about 6:44 a.m. outside 1335 Avenue of the Americas in the county and state of New York, the defendant, with intent to cause the death of another person, caused the death of such person. The defendant possessed a loaded firearm with intent to use it unlawfully against another. The defendant possessed a loaded firearm outside of his home in place of business. The defendant uttered and possessed a forged instrument of a kind specified in section 170.10 of the penal law and particularized below with knowledge that the instrument was forged and with intent to defraud, deceive, and injure another, the defendant possessed firearm silencer. The factual basis for the charges are as follows. I have reviewed surveillance video depicting the exterior of the Hilton at the above location. And there was actually video of the shooting of Brian Thompson. And you can see the person walk out. A lot of it was marked out so that the public didn't see it, but there is actual video of this occurring. Specifically, a camera angle depicting 54th Street between 7th Avenue and Avenue of the Americas. In the surveillance footage, at approximately 6:44 a.m., a man wearing a distinctive clothing outfit, the shooter, approached Brian Thompson from behind, and then the shooter held what I recognize to be a firearm with a silencer attached at the end and fired it several times at Brian Thompson, causing him to collapse on the ground. Now, that outfit, they're going to say, was found in what Luigi Mangione had with him there at the McDonald's. They're going to say that they found that exact clothing. It wasn't really all that distinct, I didn't think, but they do believe that the clothing found with him matches what the shooter was wearing. Really an odd thing for someone who went to a lot of detail and trouble to plan a crime, as he's charged with, that all of these things would still be in his possession. I'm informed by Detective Oscar Diaz, Shield 4656 of Manhattan South Homicide Squad, that he was present for the autopsy of Brian Thompson and that the cause of Mr. Thompson's death was determined to be a gunshot wound to the torso. The defendant is the person shooting and killing Brian Thompson in the above described surveillance footage based upon evidence collected during the investigation, including but not limited to, and now we're going to get a list of some of the evidence that they have collected, surveillance footage that I have reviewed from the HI New York City hostel at 891 Amsterdam Avenue, which depicts the same man wearing the same clothing leaving the hostel on December 4th, 2024 at about 5:34 a.m. So that marks the beginning, and they're going to say that they track him going to the actual shooting. Number two, surveillance footage that I have reviewed from that same hostel that depicts the same man checking into the hostel on November 24th, 2024 at about 11:20 p.m. and showing a driver's license upon check-in. So that is a good 10 days before the time of the shooting. And they're going to say that's when he showed that Michael Rosario license that was found with him in Pennsylvania. Number three, I reviewed business records from the hostel that showed that the man provided a New Jersey driver's license with the name of Mark Rosario on it. Four, I'm informed by Detective Diaz that he is informed by Patrolman Tyler Fry, he's the one from Pennsylvania, badge number 351 of the Altoona Police Department, that on December 9th, 2024 at 9:58 a.m., defendant was taken into custody at the McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania. That defendant presented a forged New Jersey driver's license with the name of Mark Rosario as his identification, which based on the number on it was the same identification defendant presented at the hostel, and that in defendant's belongings, Patrolman Christy Wasser, badge number 250, found a semi-automatic pistol with what appears to be a 3D printed loaded receiver with a metal slide and silencer and written admissions about the crime. Now, all of that is going to play in to the choice of what charges are going to levy against him in New York. And then he signs it, and that is the end of what was actually charged so far in New York. Let me make that a little bit bigger. And now I want to go into, I want to go back to those charges at the beginning, those first 5 charges. And let's start with 125.25, which is murder in the second degree. Okay, so this is what murder in the second degree means in New York. And one of the things that I don't practice in New York, disclaim giving any advice to people in New York. I am an attorney, but not in New York. But it appears that the way New York divides it down, that first degree murder relates to things like killing an officer, killing a judge, killing a witness, so that it's specific to the person who is killed. Murder in the second degree in some states means that there were some extenuating circumstances, or that it's not being charged as high an offense as murder in the first degree. That isn't really what it means in New York. It just has a different, everything that has intent is down in second degree unless it involves the people named specifically under first degree. So here is what second degree means. A person is guilty of murder in the second degree when, number one, with intent to cause the death of another person, he causes the death of such person or of a third person, except that in any prosecution under this subdivision, it is an affirmative defense that the defendant acted under the influence of extreme emotional disturbance for which there was a reasonable explanation or excuse, the reasonableness of which is to be determined from the viewpoint of a person in the defendant's situation under the circumstances as the defendant believed them to be. So I put this in because if there were going to be any argument of an exception, I would guess this would be it. This is going to be extremely hard for the defendant to win. The main thing to look at has to be intent to cause the death of such person or a third person. And the New York police are going to argue that that absolutely is shown by the length of time and by the efforts that were made, as well as by the flight afterwards, and that it was very organized. There was no reasonable explanation or excuse. There was no extreme emotional disturbance. This was a choice. So that's what I expect them to argue. Now let's go back and look. The next charge, as you can see, is 265.03. So let's pull that one up. And there are 2 different things that he gets charged with, 2 different 265.03s. A person is guilty of criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree when, and the first one is, with intent to use the same unlawfully against another, such person possesses a loaded firearm. So in other words, all that happened is you possessed a firearm and you intended to use it unlawfully against another. It was just a possession along with the intent being the really most important part of this, and the two work together. Then the second part he's going to be charged with in just a minute is such person possesses any loaded firearm. Such possession shall not, except as provided in subdivision 1 or 7 of section 265.02 of this article, constitute a violation of this subdivision if such possession takes place in such person's home or place of business. So number 1 is intent to use it against somebody and possession. Number 3 is possesses it, and it's not in your house and it's not in your business. So there's a greater component under part 1 because of that intent to use it unlawfully against another. So going back to I think this is in your one. Yes, it is. So you can see that there's a charge against 265.031B. That was the one that required the intent, and 265.033, and that was just possession, and it's not in your home and it's not in your business. So now we'll go on to the next charge, 170.25. A person is guilty of criminal possession of a forged instrument in the second degree when, with knowledge that it is forged and with intent to defraud, deceive, or injure another, he utters or possesses any forged instrument of a kind specified in section 170.10. All a super fancy way of saying that he had a forged driver's license because he wanted people to think that's who he was. He wanted to use that as fake ID. That's basically what it's saying in this particular case. And then we go back to the next one, criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree. And that is one more down. He was charged under 2, such person possesses, and they specifically mention a silencer or a machine gun, but I don't believe that it was in any way a machine gun. So I believe what they're talking about is the silencer that he had. So having gone through all of that, we've now seen what the charges are that are against him presently, both in Pennsylvania and New York. Now, at this stage, he has not agreed to extradition. It's really kind of it routinely happens. There's zero chance that he won't be extradited to New York from Pennsylvania. But at this point, he's objecting to it. This is buying some time. It means there's going to have to be some work on the part of New York to bring him there. The governor has said, yeah, I'm totally willing to sign any extradition papers that are needed. We absolutely need to bring him back here. Law enforcement will cooperate, Pennsylvania to New York. It will happen. But at this stage, he's not agreeing to it. So the process will have to be followed. And it will probably take a while now, several weeks anyway. So I wanted to show you too what the attorney for Luigi Mangione said about what he's going to plead. Now, first of all, he said he was asked at a press conference, now, are you under the impression, are you trying to defend the client on the fact that he is not the shooter? And he said, this was his response, that's right, he's not the shooter, but I haven't seen any evidence that says that he's the shooter. Now, that's a correct response legally, because that literally is, he has to be shown the evidence, and the evidence has to be presented and effective in a court of law before there can be any kind of conviction. Nonetheless, you can see where that's not exactly an answer to the question, are you trying to defend on the fact he's not the shooter? He's saying, I haven't seen any evidence that says he is. Then he reminded everybody there is a presumption of innocence in our country that until you're proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, he said, I've seen zero evidence at this point. I'm not even aware of the charges, because at the time he made this first press conference, there had not yet been charges in New York. So at that point, he was being asked repeatedly, well, you've now pled not guilty in Pennsylvania. What are you going to plead to in New York? And I wanted to play what he said.
Obtained.
Understanding that you have said you have not seen charges coming out of New York yet, that if and when there are, and you have seen them, will you be pleading not guilty to those as well?
That would be my expectation. That certainly would be my advice.
So I think we can see from that we are very likely to see him pleading not guilty to the New York charges as well, which of course you would expect. That would be absolutely what I would expect. He said that from what he had seen up to this point, he hadn't even been charged, but that when it did come out, he was expecting that it would be very likely, he certainly would recommend that his client plead not guilty when that comes up. So let me go ahead. I'll answer a few questions. If you would put your questions in the chat right now with question marks at the beginning, that'll help me spot them in the chat, and I would appreciate that. And meanwhile, let's go ahead and Janice, ex-lawyer, says, loving the channel. So glad. I really appreciate that. She's retired in the UK, so I'm very honored that you would watch the channel as an attorney. Thank you. Buy Blue Shopper, he may need you to defend him. Oh my goodness. Well, I think he's got counsel, so we're good on that score. I think it's going to be one really, really hard case to win. They all are, but this one really. Thank you for the super chat. So Nina B is saying, I'm astounded that someone can kill another person, then go about as if nothing happened, eating at McDonald's and working on a laptop. That is the charge. That is exactly the charge. And it does seem like quite the disconnect. The Big Mac attack at the end of that, I guess, granted, they even made a comment at the press conference, something like, well, I guess a guy's got to eat. It had been 5 days, so I don't know how long it had been, but yes. Harley, oh my goodness, what a generous gift. Thank you so much, Harley. And I agree about our beautiful mods, Mama, Marlon, and Denise. Thank you so much. Very lovely gift. I appreciate that. All right, so let's take a look and see if there's some questions over here in the chat. I got to scoot back up just a little bit and grab the first ones, hopefully. All right, I think there we go. And I'm looking for ones with question marks at the beginning. That's my only shot of catching them in here. So let's see what, here we go. Shy Gal. There are some saying that Miranda was not read at the McDonald's. If this is true and is an issue, could that rule out the evidence he had on him as well? Not if they got a search warrant. So the Miranda warning would be related to his right to remain silent and what he possessed with him as long as they got a search warrant, not based on what he said. It doesn't sound like he acknowledged anything at all. The one exception would be he did initially give a false ID, but at that point, there was no need really probably to read his Miranda rights to him. But that's going to be super interesting to find out what exactly was said to him. I'm hopeful there's some body cam footage and we can find out more about it. But at that point, they were just trying to figure out who he was. So I don't think until they established that they had to do any kind of Miranda rights. They did make the statement, though, that they knew who it was as soon as he pulled down his mask. So we'll just see. I cannot imagine that that's going to be an issue with the things, as long as they, like I said, they got the warrant and based it on accurate facts. All right. Anna Banana, how soon do you think the trial will happen? Oh my goodness, like 2 years. It'll be a really long time unless there's something unusual. Maybe he'll go for a speedy trial and maybe it'll be fast tracked, but typically it takes a lot longer than that. So that's just my cynical belief, is that it will be a long time. Scooter wants to know, how would Luigi get that attorney? Was he appointed? Well, interesting that you asked that, Scooter, because the attorney was asked that at least twice during the press conference. You know, who hired you? How are you? And he was very specific. He is not court appointed. He has been privately hired, but he also said he's not telling who hired him. Now, we know from other articles that are out there that apparently Luigi's family is fairly well-to-do, and well-known member of the Baltimore, Maryland community. And so his family probably hired the attorney for him. That would be my guess. Obviously, he probably would not have the money while in jail to do it. But I would imagine that his family contacted the attorney and arranged for all this. Camilla Juliana is asking me, isn't this action worse for society in general? Also, one should not negotiate with terrorists, so the policies will not be discussed now by the companies. So I think you're asking, Camilla Juliana, isn't shooting a CEO worse for society? 100% yes. 100% yes. It is definitely worse for society to shoot people instead of to have rational discussion about change. Is he right that we have some significant problems with the insurance system in our country? I think so. I am absolutely convinced of that. And I have a lot of experience with the medical system because of my husband, George, and his saga as he went through multiple illnesses and just a really long descent into quadriplegia. So, yeah, I know a lot about that and I have a lot of opinions about that. But is it worse to kill somebody? Yeah, that's not the way to resolve that. Not at all. Now, let me separate that statement from the question of whether or not Luigi Mangione is the person who committed the crime. Those are two different issues. And Luigi Mangione needs to be presumed innocent and he needs to be given every right under our law. That's not just for him, that's for us, because that's who we are as a people. We believe that is how justice is served. And so that definitely still needs to happen. So thanks for your question. Kate asking, didn't he make the ghost gun using a 3D printer? That is what is being stated by the Pennsylvania police. Does anyone know if 3D printers can be changed by manufacturers so that anything that resembles a gun can't be used utilizing a printer? Kate, here's why I'm guessing that would be really hard to do is because there are pieces to it, and any one of those pieces isn't the whole gun. So I think it would be hard to design a machine that couldn't make the pieces that could be assembled. So that's my guess, but I am really speaking out of turn there, Kate, because it's not like I know anything about 3D printing. It's just off the top of my head, it seems like it would be hard to do that. Ataya is asking me, have you seen the interview with his lawyer? I haven't seen the interview. I watched his press conference, but I know he also had an interview, so I'll look forward to seeing that next. Tim Harris, what is the defense lawyer's motivation for giving a press conference? Okay, interesting question. There are people who will have different opinions on that. In general, my personal belief is that it is important for an attorney to get out in front for the client of social media and the press narrative that's going to come out about a case. I think that's really important. It's also absolutely nothing that has ever been taught in law school, and it's not something that most lawyers feel comfortable with at all. So most lawyers just ignore that. They do nothing with the media. They're easily agree, oh yes, of course there can be a seal in this case, and then they don't go out and try to make statements so that their client side gets into the public narrative. And what happens then is what we saw, press conferences from New York, from Pennsylvania, and they file documents and they say, here's all our evidence. And that's all that anybody in the public gets is one side. We get the one side that is against the defendant. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's good. I don't think it's fair. I think we also need to hear from the defendant as to what the arguments are. To some degree, they don't know yet. To some degree, their attorney is catching up to what law enforcement has been working on for weeks, months, even sometimes years. So for that reason, I think it's hard, but I think it is good for attorneys to come forward. Now, the entire purpose of what's said and what's done is simply to present the case in the best possible light to the media and to the public. That it's not to promote the lawyer, but it's rather to discuss what the case is. In this particular case, the lawyer was extremely careful not to say anything that would cross any boundaries, such as who hired him or when he was hired or anything related to what his client had said. It almost made the press conference a little pointless because there were so many questions he couldn't answer. But I think it is good in general that he's making an effort to connect with the media. Now, was there a motivation beyond that was just self-serving? I don't know. I really can't answer that. I do think in general, it's a good thing for lawyers to try to act on behalf of their clients, to talk to the public, to talk to the media. Melissa Jones wants to know, what do you think about him fighting extradition? Do you think it will take long? I thought it was kind of pointless. However, his attorney said, he had decided to do that. It does kind of stretch things out. It buys a little time for the attorney and the defense to kind of get their bearings, to get their feet under them. Because remember, law enforcement has been working with many, many people on this for now 10 days since the 4th, 7 days, I guess, 7, 8 days. And now for the defense is coming in 5 days into that and not having anywhere near the manpower or the information. So they're trying to play catch up. And so, and I'm not, of course, referring to the defendant himself. I'm referring to the attorney. So for that reason, there can be some value to buying some additional time. And it also may force the New York attorneys to give more information and provide a little bit more detail. For example, they in fact have filed their charges. And that, of course, had to happen before any extradition could take place. So as far as fighting it, it's ultimately a losing cause, but I don't know. He chose to do that. All right. And he got asked about that in the press conference too. Like, what's up with that? Why are you doing that? Does the use of a suppressor make this a federal case? Asked Guy Goddess. I do not know the answer to that. I don't know if that converts it. I think there has all along been discussion about whether or not there would also be federal components of the case because of the fact that he fled across state lines. He came across state lines into the state, and they apparently are going to argue that he planned the crime, that that's why he came, and then that he left and fled across state lines. So for that reason, there might be a federal component anyway. So I don't know if the suppressor changes things or adds anything to that. All right. And I am looking for any more question marks. Sunset Gazing IMO. Is it possible he was the other person on the phone that morning? If he was the lookout calling the person who committed the crime, he's on his way. If he was the one to set up the getaway bike, etc. So I think what he suggests, what Sunset Gazing is suggesting, that maybe there was more than one person involved. We do know that there have been discussions all along about whether more than one person was involved, and specifically about how Luigi Mangione would have gotten the information that Brian Thompson was going to be walking in this exact place at this exact time. How would he know that? And did he have some kind of inside information? So, or did whoever the shooter was have inside information? So in this particular case, the question that Sunset Gazing is asking is, what about whether or not Luigi maybe wasn't the person who actually committed the act? Instead, he was on the phone. The one thing we know for sure is that at the press conference, they said it was possible they were not shutting down the investigation, but that they believed he acted alone. So that is the statement being made by law enforcement and was made. When I get to the evidence for my next video, I'm going to be listing out all of the evidence and that we have gotten from all of the different sources and sort of going through what is it we think that they have. And one of the things I'll be doing is playing that little clip so you can hear law enforcement talking about why they think and that they think only Luigi was involved and no one else. Annie K asked about how might legal issues arise from the two-state span. Well, one is extradition. We already see that. There also will be some back and forth about how he gets tried where. And so, but I think for the most part, they clearly are working hand in hand, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of dispute about that. All right. Ataya is asking me, will this likely be in federal court? Do you think we will get cameras in the courtroom? And if not during court, do you think we will still see some of the pretrial stuff? So will this likely be in federal court? There might be a separate federal case, but what we're looking at right now is the New York case and, of course, Pennsylvania case, but that's smaller. The New York case. Will we get cameras in the courtroom? No, I don't think we will, because typically New York is extremely closed off. It's almost impossible to get documents. And it's very frustrating when there's an important case in New York because there is so little transparency. And shame on New York for that, because they really don't provide transparency. It's also not likely to be televised if it's in federal court, because no cases are televised. There are no televisions within the federal court. So bottom line, I'm guessing not. I'm guessing none of this will be televised. All right, let me head back over here and let's see. Thank you, Harley, 62. I appreciate that very much. And let me take a look at the next question in the chat. I'm looking for question marks at the beginning because as it goes by, it's real difficult to spot people. And Alex Lalu is asking, is from Italy. Well, welcome in. On American social media, I've heard people calling for jury nullification, but I haven't understood what exactly that means by just using Wikipedia. So it's sort of a general concept, the idea that the jury can make a decision about what it thinks is right or wrong and ignore the law behind it. So let's say there's a law that would say this person committed a crime, this person should be convicted. Jury nullification would be the process of the jury saying, you know, we think under the law, he really did do that. He meets all of the checkpoints set out in the law, but we're just not going to convict him. We're just not going to because we don't think that's just or right. We're not going to convict him. That's what it refers to. Now, in this particular case, probably what you were reading about or what people were writing about when you read on social media, they were talking about the fact that there are some people who have been saying that his cause was just in that he was trying to protest, at least they think this, they assume that he was trying to protest the corporate greed and specifically in the insurance industry. Right now, we don't really have a lot of background about that, but in general, my view is that's not an excuse for murder. That's still, those are things that 100% need to be addressed, but then on the other hand, are not an excuse for murder. So jury nullification is a rare thing. It's certainly not anything that a jury is charged to do, but do juries sometimes do that? Almost surely, yes. So, all right. Well, I will see you all. I don't know when I will get that next video out with the evidence. I may do it as a pop-up video tomorrow, but for sure, I will see you all at 7 p.m. Eastern on Friday.